Hello.
How are we today?
Doing good. And how about yourself?
Not too bad, thanks. I just freaked out for a second. I'm like, it is Thursday, isn't it? Such a strange week with the holiday.
Hello.
Hey guys.
What's happening? Say what?
Hey, Drew.
Hey, good to see you, Martin.
Good to see you, man.
Hey, Kevin. It's nice
Hello.
to see
Yeah, I had to hide from everybody.
you. All right.
So Martin, what are all those trophies for? Massages or what?
Best massage therapist around, yes.
That's what I thought.
No, those are different running events and whatnot.
Okay. Very cool.
All right, people getting started.
Yeah. Okay. So welcome everybody to this week's webinar on the foot. It's called A Look Into Your Soul. So we are recording this session. If you prefer, you can leave your video off. Please unmute yourself if you'd like to be a part of the discussion, which we encourage. But if you would prefer, you can use the chat box and ask us questions throughout the webinar as well. All right. So yeah, I guess we'll just go ahead and get started then.
Do we want to go through the outline of the this session?
Yep. Okay. So let me just pull this up here. Yeah. So basically, the way we start the discussions is we cover basic anatomy, function, and movement. And then we show you some images of the anatomy of the area. So in this case, it'll be the foot and ankle, the muscles and the bones that make up the feet and ankle. And then we will talk about some injuries. And then we have a guest speaker that is here to talk about his personal injuries. And then we will go over some self-care, stretches and strengthening techniques, and answer any questions. But again, please, if you have any questions as we go along, feel free to chime in.
Right.
All right. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you. I'm going to be sharing the articles from this week's self-care series. So let me just pull this up here. All right. All right, so the first article we have is basically anatomy and movement of the foot. Okay, Martin, would you like to talk about the anatomy a little bit?
Sure. So yeah, the anatomy of the foot itself, it's a pretty big deal. Lots of moving parts. It's broken down into what, like 26 bones, 33 joints, and 100 different muscles, tendons, and ligaments. So when you talk about like the muscles, which we focus on as massage therapists, there's muscles they're categorized into intrinsic muscles, which are muscles that move the toes, and then there's extrinsic muscles, which are more muscles of the lower leg, so like the calf muscles, but they transfer, they sometimes cross into the foot and are responsible for foot movement as well. So needless to say, there's a lot going on down there. The foot itself is broken down into 3 different parts. So you have the forefoot, which is your toes and metatarsals. Then you have the midfoot, which it's kind of like a pyramid of stacked small bones on top of each other. And these actually form what are called your arches. I mean, I'm sure you heard about high arches, low arches. And then the hindfoot, which is your heel, and your talus, which they form your ankle. So what's the main role and the focus in all of this? So all the joints, how they're stacked, all these different cables and ligaments and muscles that run through and over everything, responsible for two things. So supporting your body weight and transferring load and movement. It pretty much just comes down to that. And when it comes down to the different types of movement, there's always that possibility of muscles becoming overused and then muscles becoming underused, which if this happens on the ground floor with your feet, could potentially cause problems elsewhere in the body. So the goal of us as massage therapists is to kind of recognize where these imbalances are coming from and address them. So the difficult part is that some of those intrinsic muscles that I was talking about, they're so deep in the foot and in the back of the posterior leg that they're almost impossible to palpate. So what we have to kind of rely on is the synergistic muscles, the muscles around the area, to kind of see where a problem is. So some of those problems like plantar fasciitis, inversion ankle sprains, calf strains. But in a perfect world, the body weight would be equally distributed on what's called the triad of the foot, or the tripod of the foot. So your big toe, your pinky toe, and your heel, right? So so what that does is it stabilizes the ankle, it stabilizes the body weight, and stabilizes the foot through movement, through the gait cycle. But there are issues that come about that, for whatever reason, things become off balance. So things like overpronation is huge. So finding how your foot pronates is a good start for a lot of people. And there's ways to.
Before we touch upon this, I have a question. So you mentioned that there's a lot of basically the end of every muscle in the legs and etc. are converging to the feet, right? Is this so? Just wanted to touch upon one of the point that you were making and saying that it's hard for you to pinpoint what's going on in the foot because it could be related to some higher level issue. Am I understanding this correctly, or am I completely okay?
It's what I meant is it's hard to. So when we palpate a muscle, we're able to tell just based on the tone of the muscle if there's something wrong with it, if it's tight or whatever. The thing is, with some of these posterior muscles in the back of the leg, it's hard because they're just so deep. I mean, it's almost like palpate. Some of them, like the flexor hallucis longus, which we'll talk about. I mean, that guy is pretty much flush up against the back of your fibula. So it's right up against there, and to be able to get in there and palpate it, it's doable. It's just not, something that pops out a lot. So what we look for is tightness in the surrounding muscles that might indicate an issue elsewhere.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so
it can be difficult because it's a very complex and complicated area, and a lot of the muscles are super tiny in there, so they can just be hard to isolate.
Yeah, that's fair. And so then you were talking about overpronation, and so I kind of cut off your flow. So do you want to dive deeper into this?
So when you talk about pronation, what that simply means is the degree of how much your arch collapses upon impact of the ground when you're going through the gait cycle. So pretty much how much your foot rolls inward. So what this does is it allows for shock absorption. So you want this to happen. It's a good thing. The problem lies is when there's too much pronation. So when you hear about overpronation, that's what's going on. Or if you talk about underpronation, that's also a different thing. So I think it's like 15 degrees of pronation is considered ideal. And there's ways to test this. So a lot of it can be done through just like a visual test. Some of them can be done, it's called like the wet foot test. If you put your foot in some water and step on a piece of paper, you can see if you have a high arch or low arch. And there's different ways. There's gait assessments where they put you on a treadmill. Like I know Philly Runner does it, or they can videotape you from the back while you're running, and you can actually see if you're overpronating or underpronating when you run, and that will get you suited up for the type of shoe that you want to wear that will help.
Yeah, and the question. So I always thought that because I have like flat feet, I always thought it. So it was. So you're saying it's due to it's. I thought it was due to the form of my feet, but you're saying it's due to the way that I pronate.
So the thing is, it's about how your arches. So when you talk about if you have a high arch or a low arch, that's something that you're kind of born with. Okay. So that's something you don't really have control over, but there are ways like through muscle tightness, like people who have plantar fasciitis and tight calves, that can actually pull the arch up into a higher position. So people who underpronate, right? So they're more likely to develop like the plantar fasciitis. Not all the time, but just from like experience, people who tend to underpronate. And so what this does is it puts excessive strain on the plantar fasciitis, and over time, that band becomes overstretched, irritated, inflamed, and worn out, and it causes actual like tears in the tissue. So,
sorry, can you explain me how the form of your arc is supposed to is influencing this the most strain on the plantar fascia? I don't understand the mechanism.
So if you have so let's take overpronation. All right. So if you're overpronated, your ankle rolls too far inward when you land. So all the weight and the distribution is going on the big toe and that second toe. Okay. All right. So that's seen with people more who have flat feet. No, not all the people who have flat feet overpronate. So that excessive rotation of the foot actually could cause more issues elsewhere. So like the tibia, that's where you have like, shin splints. People who are prone to shin splints usually have flat feet because they're rolling inward, and they have the shock absorption is too much, so to speak. Whereas if you have a high arch, you're not getting that shock absorption.
Gotcha. So is it fair to say that it's possible to have, like flat feet without having any, and having a neutral position, or you're always going to have a little bit of overpronation?
You're always going to have pronation. So your foot, it's natural for your foot to pronate when your foot lands. That's part of the way that the foot is constructed to adjust to the shock absorption. It's the problem comes is when there's too much of that inward rotation.
Gotcha.
So if you have flat, if you have flat feet, you're pronating too much. If you have high arches, you're not getting enough of that.
Okay. Yeah, I get it. Okay, thanks. I think dumb question, right? I'm trying to understand.
No, it's a very confusing topic because I mean it's hard because you don't see your foot going through that phase, that gait assessment, unless you either videotape yourself or have somebody do it for you, because it's just hard to really see for yourself how you do it.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. What was I would say? But is there? So I mean, I always had like again flat feet again, but that's kind of I think genetics more than anything else, right?
Mhm.
What other causes do you see that could be leaning to, leading to this kind of, overpronation or underpronation?
So things like like plantar fasciitis is something that we'll talk about. So you see a lot of times there's a muscle in the back of the leg. It's a really deep muscle. Again, it's called your tibialis posterior. And a lot of times people who have issues with pronation, that tibialis posterior muscle is weak. It's not activated. So there's ways to strengthen that that muscle in particular. So things like, I'm sure, like if you saw like the band assessment where you tie a resistance band around your ball of your foot, and it's like the windshield wiper effect with your foot. So what that's doing is it's strengthening that deep tibialis posterior muscle in the back of the leg. So it's the purpose of that muscle is to stabilize the ankle joint. That's what it comes down to. There's muscles, those intrinsic muscles are meant to stabilize the ankle joint when you're going through your gait. And if those muscles aren't activated, just like with any muscle in the body, if it's weak, you're going to get overpronation or underpronation.
Gotcha. But like, what I'm trying to get at is there external sources, but so why would this muscle be weak, right? Is this go ahead.
So it can be, we can get into the debate of shoes. It always comes down to that. I forget who said it. I think it was in Born to Run, where it's like, if you have high-tech shoes, you have low-tech feet. And it's really no coincidence that, populations people who don't wear shoes don't run into these issues. They don't run into plantar fasciitis or things like that. And it's you want to be able to become aware of the weight distribution while you're walking and those issues don't usually happen.
Yeah, but that's fair if you're walking in the grass, right? If you're running 20, there's been a significant amount of studies that looked at, running barefoot with on roads that leads to a lot of broken feet and etc. Right?
It does, but people who are doing that a lot of times, like I know those Vibram shoes get a bad rep because people are going from wearing a completely cushioned shoe to running 10 miles in a pair of barefoot shoes, and that's where the injuries happen. So just like with any muscle, you have to train it, you have to strengthen the surrounding tissues.
Yeah,
Hey Martin.
Yes.
Just while you're on this, I actually just posted in the chat. I went from orthotics and regular running shoes, and you treated my plantar fasciitis, and it went away. I bought expensive orthotics, then it came back, ditched the orthotics, ditched the running shoes, got natural footwear with toe spacers and all that, cured the plantar again, but then I got metatarsalgia, I think is what I have. But to your point, with COVID, all the parks were closed, so I started running too soon in the street, and probably, I'm guessing that's what hurt my metatarsal. So I'm kind of in the footwear dilemma stage of, I don't know what the heck to wear. When I put regular runners on now, it feels like my toes are in vice clamps. So I don't know if you can speak to that or if that's way too much, but sorry, that's a question I have.
It's a good question because I want to add a comment first before you give your answer, Martin, is that obviously I've run on a little bit more minimalistic shoes, and I want to raise 2 points. One from personal experience. When I was running with much lighter minimal shoes, like those small Kinvaras that were super minimal, and I didn't increase the mileage right away, but it's been a fairly I've been injured doing this, and it wasn't like I went from 0 to, it was a progressive thing that just, because I didn't just run on them all the time, but I found that I was a little bit more prone to injury. That's anecdotal evidence, but more importantly is I the day also, you have to look also at the performance aspect, right? And the day that the guys actually break records with no footwear, then we can talk. When it's not specifically in trails or etc. Like, I think there's a distinction to be made between with the type of running that you're doing and the shoe that you're making, and there's probably some things that are more adapted to one or the other. Is that fair?
No, it definitely makes sense. When you talk about the competitive side of it, right, you're not going to see people running sub 200 or 2-hour marathons in a pair of barefoot shoes. That's just how far the sport has come. But to answer Drew's situation, what I normally suggest is for people coming back off of an injury like that is to rotate footwear. So not sticking to one shoe, one style of shoe, one stability shoe. Switch it up. So what you're doing is you're just getting you're just working the smaller muscles of the feet and just adapting them to different stimulus, really.
So
helpful, thanks.
So you're suggesting, sorry, I feel like I'm being super negative, but you're suggesting to really change between I thought you had to have an adaptation of the gait if you had minimal shoes. Isn't that the case? Adaptation of your running form, sorry.
No, not necessarily. Like, the whole concept of heel strike versus forefoot strike, it's not really that important. So like, if you're more of a forefoot runner, of course you're going to be putting more stress on the calf muscles. Yes. But when you talk about gait and foot location, it's all about where the foot is landing underneath the hip, which is more important. But yeah, if you're, it's not so much if you're a heel striker or a minimalist or forefoot striker, as opposed to where your leg is landing when you land.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Okay. I suppose I had the false idea that you had to change your form, and therefore I didn't quite understand how you could switch between one type of stuff and the other. You know what I mean?
Right. You're not gonna, if somebody tells you to, especially if you've been running a while, to change the way you run, right, it's not going to work out too well. So it's more so about like what I said, is where your leg is landing, making sure you're not overstriding, because if you're overstriding, you're obviously going to be heel striking. If you're understriding, you're going to be more so on the ball of your foot, toes of the feet. So that's more something to pay attention to than purposely trying to heel strike when you run, or purposely try to run on the forefoot when you run.
Yeah, that makes sense, because I mean, you worry about form when you're able to run. I think one last thing is, and it's not necessarily related to running, but I mean, I have to wear insoles when I'm running, or when I'm because my feet are fat as hell. So how am I supposed to do? Like, to me, I think it's I will never be able to actually wear a fully minimal shoe, right? So for people that have very flat feet and need insole to counterbalance, is that you wouldn't recommend going too minimal, right?
Probably not, no. So I think insoles are great. The problem that I don't like to see is people who become reliant on them. So I know if people who have orthotics, it's really, if you're going to go that route, it's really important to get them switched out every now and then. You can't be like, I had somebody a couple months ago who had foot pain, and she came in and I was like, so she's wearing orthotics, she's wearing insoles. I'm like, so when was the last time you switched them out? And she said over 5 years ago. So she's been wearing the same insoles for years. And I mean, you're just like with anything, your foot anatomy, it'll change based on a lot of issues. So you just have to make sure that you're switching them out if you're going to go that route wearing insoles like Superfeet or something like that.
Martin, what about using metatarsal pads instead of insoles or instead of orthotics?
Are those like the pedicure things that people like that splay your toes out? Are those like,
there you go.
What is it?
It's a metatarsal pad. So I think it helps absorb some shock under your metatarsals and helps your toes splay a bit.
Okay, cool.
I don't know. I'm just trying them. It's brand new. So far they feel good, but.
Do you have them in your running shoes?
I do. Well, I'm not running right now because I'm having a lot of metatarsal pain. So I have to heal that first, but.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Anyway.
Interesting.
Yeah. Now we do have another question here. So one of our participants is dealing with plantar fasciitis right now, and she's asking how to manage that and how to treat it. But what I thought we'd do is we'd move on to our guest speaker, Kevin, because I know that he has had issues with plantar fasciitis in the past. So Kevin, amongst other things, but maybe we can start with plantar fasciitis and then we can readdress some of the other injuries that you've had to deal with over the years.
Okay.
All right.
I've had plantar fasciitis since I was a teenager. Really didn't think of it much back then, assumed I was being careless in the way I ran or whatever I did playing football. So I ignored it. And it would come and go for years, to the point where I couldn't walk flat on my feet anymore. To this day, I still have issues with plantar fasciitis. It's been so bad to where I could feel the tearing away from the heel bone, to the point where I would walk on the sides of my feet just so I didn't have to put any pressure onto those muscles.
That sounds pretty brutal. So when it becomes so acute like that, what do you do to manage it?
Then I did nothing. Now that I actually know what it is, I do, rest ice compression, elevation, let some of the inflammation go down. I'll pull out the little foot roller and I'll roll the plantar muscles out a little bit to stretch them out. And once I'm not having the stabbing pain anymore, I'll go to stretching as well as re-strengthening those muscles.
Okay. All right.
And you do this on a regular basis, or like how often do you do it?
Unfortunately, for as bad as my feet are, I have to do this every day.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
And do you notice it's worse? Like, I know people who suffer from it, as soon as they wake up in the morning, like those first 10 steps are the worst. Is that true?
Yes, it used to be that bad for me. First step out of the bed was excruciating to the point I hit the floor and tiptoe to the bathroom. That's why I have to make a point to make sure to stretch it. I'll even sit in bed for a few minutes and do stretching exercises before I actually put my foot down on the ground.
Wow.
Okay. And then Kevin's actually put together some fantastic routines for both stretching and strengthening. So I'm going to share that in the chat with you now, just for you to share it with everyone, just for you to reference back. Do you have any favorite stretches, Kevin, that you like to use for plantar fasciitis?
I usually do several times a day. I'll place my toes up against the corner of a wall and lean into that stretch. I'll feel that into the plantar muscles, even though a lot of people use it for Achilles stretches and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. But that seems to work well for me.
Okay, wonderful. All right. Well, thank you for sharing the plantar fasciitis portion of your plethora of foot injuries.
Yes.
So I guess how many other foot injuries do you have to deal with in your life, or have you had to recover from in the past?
Well, that I can recall, about 11.
Okay.
Yes.
Right.
So some minor arthritis. I've had multiple ankle sprains that have turned into chronic ankle instability. Ligament strains, some talofibular ligament tears, lateral nerve entrapments. I have a fifth metatarsal injury from way back when that I never got checked on. I have foot cramps, foot spasms if I overstretch, nerve entrapment in my heel from the over elongation when sprinting, and the sudden stops, jamming the heel into the ground multiple times. The plantar fasciitis I've had in both feet. I've had a partial Achilles tear, and the Achilles tendon enthesopathy. I actually had no idea. The doctor told me about that 2 years ago. I seen the word ESP and said, "Oh, this is too long. I don't care." And I actually just reintroduced myself to that email to find out what it actually meant.
All right. Any favorites out of that list?
Oh, my favorites are the ankle instability. It's just nothing like when you take a step and your foot just waves instead of a natural controlled glide. It just waves every time. And if I'm not careful, I will come down on the side of my foot and roll my ankle.
Okay. Oh, yeah, that's
yes. It was so bad when I was younger. In my head, I assumed if I wore knee-length, knee-high socks, it would give me stability in my ankles. So every time I put on ankle socks, I rolled my ankles. So I just got to the point where I would put on cruise socks or knee-high socks just for that little support.
Wow. Okay.
Do you wear any things to stabilize your ankle now, or?
From time to time, I'll pull out a couple of stability braces here and there. My doctor actually told me last year that it's actually making my ankles weaker if I'm relying on them too much.
Okay.
All right. And then, so are all of these injuries chronic? Some of them are acute. How many do you continue to have trouble with?
Well, now they've all become acute because I've had them for so long. It's been over 20 years that I've been dealing with a lot of them. The Achilles tear and the Achilles issues actually happened maybe 5 years ago, and I ignored it because I really didn't know what it was. I heard the pop, I felt the burning sensation, the numbness, and took some aspirin, said, "It'll go away, it's fine." That was something they told you in the military, deal with the pain. So it would come and go. I developed a giant nodule on the back of my ankle to the point where you could actually see it. And my ankles would just get weak on me as I walked. Those are never fun. Yeah.
That sounds fun, yes, indeed.
Right. And then how did you develop these injuries? Were they sports related or?
They mostly all began in sports. Carelessness in sports, not practicing proper movement techniques. Back then, it wasn't something that was really encouraged. It was get to where you need to get, no matter what it does to your body. So, you ignore the pain and you move the way the coach wants you to go. You didn't go to the trainer, you didn't go to the doctor because, it was seen as just little minor issues. So you learn to ignore it after a while, but over time, the acute pain turns into chronic pain, and it's something you just can't ignore anymore.
Okay. And then, so I guess at that point, when it became chronic, are you receiving medical treatment? Did you receive medical treatment at the time when it became so hard to function with these injuries?
Yes. Actually, about a year and a half ago, it was the last time I rolled my ankle to the point where I couldn't stand anymore, and I ignored it for a while, to the point where I couldn't balance myself on one foot. So I ended up having to go to the PT and retraining both of my ankles and my feet from scratch.
So Kevin, sorry, the one thing I wanted to ask you, because I'm sure you've heard about this, that if you roll your ankle, so you're talking about your typical inversion ankle sprain, like when you roll your ankle, it's like, I think they said 30% of the people who do that, the athletes who do that, it becomes a chronic issue. And not because of a weakness per se, but when you stretch, when you sprain your ankle, you're not only stretching the ligament, there's not only damage to the ligament, but you're also damaging the sensory receptors on the ligament. So those things are responsible for proprioception. So when we talked about proprioception a couple of weeks ago, it's where your foot, it's the recognition of where your foot is when you land. So if those receptors are damaged in the ligament, which is why it can possibly be giving out on you. So I know like people who do that go through extensive amounts of PT and focusing on balancing, one-legged balance exercises. Is that something that they focus on?
Yes, a lot of one-legged balance, a lot of standing on the slant board, a lot of one leg, dropping your body, forcing the heel to stretch. I did that a lot for a good 2.5 months, 3 times a week.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not very reassuring if you roll your ankle once that you can count on it happening continually for time to come.
Yeah. It happened so much that as I got older, it didn't bother me anymore when it would roll. I would catch myself, I rolled my ankle, bang my foot on the ground a couple of times. It would pop back in place and I would just move on with my day.
Wow. Yeah, that's rough. And then, so now, what do you do for prevention of these ailments?
Well, now a lot of stretching every single day.
Okay.
A lot of resistance work because my joints and ligaments are so weak because they didn't support anything. They have to be retrained, like I said earlier. So a lot of one-legged stance, a lot of dynamic stretching, muscular retraining. The slant board I actually liked because it felt good. Heel drops, I'll do that every day. I'll do it on my way to work. I'll stand on the steps at work waiting for clients to do a heel drop. I do the foot rolling maybe twice a week. Do gastroc stretches, mobility training, heel raises a lot. And one the PT had me learning to do was the resisted inversion and eversion with the resistance bands.
Mm-hmm.
Those are fun. And I guess the most important thing for me was to be aware of the type of footwear that I wore. I told my mom this, I have about 30 pair of shoes in my closet and only one pair actually feels comfortable.
Okay.
What kind of shoes?
Various running shoes, training shoes. I've always had an issue since high school when these injuries began. The shoe always felt like it was compressing my foot. So I didn't want to do anything excessively physical because of the burning sensation. So I assumed I needed a wider shoe. That was wrong. The shoe just rolled around on my foot, causing problems. Recently, about a year ago, I learned about the toe box and the heel to toe drop. So those are things that I actually pay attention more now to. So a lot of my shoes that I actually wear on a daily basis have a wider toe box. And some of the shoes they have a little bit lower heel to toe drop, not a complete drop because of my excessive weight. My feet couldn't handle the lack of cushioning at all. So take away a little cushioning, force my feet to actually do the job that they're supposed to do. And those ligaments and tendons slowly began to get stronger.
All right. Well, I'm glad to hear that you're not ignoring it anymore.
Not at all.
It's probably a good move on your part, yeah.
All right. Does anyone have any questions for Kevin?
Was there a question in the comments section? Somebody was asking?
Yes.
Plantar fasciitis?
Yeah, so she just asked what should she do to treat her plantar fasciitis that she has right now. So yeah, so I've sent through those articles for her. She's going to try some of the stretching and strengthening techniques that Kevin has suggested.
Could we perhaps give, like outside of those exercises, do you have a recommendation in terms of, sorry, no, Kevin is doing it every day, but is there a recommendation in terms of frequency that you would suggest for this type of article, type of work?
Well, I mean, it's different for everybody. So, I mean, I know for women, for example, who wear high-heeled shoes are more prone to tight calves and tight plantar fascia. So if you're, like Kevin said, if you're wearing shoes that are with a higher heel, that's going to put your foot in a more contracted phase on the bottom. So, I mean, just making sure you're not only addressing the bottom of the foot, but also the calf muscles as well. So foam rolling the calves, using a tennis ball or lacrosse ball to roll out the bottoms of the foot, 3 times a week. The thing about plantar fascia or plantar fasciitis is it is an itis, so there's inflammation. You don't want to be rolling inflammation right away because you're just going to increase the issue and make it worse. So, wait a while and then you're able to work on it.
Okay.
There are a lot of people who, when they get massage, they ask for their, they say they have plantar fasciitis, and they actually want you to strip or lengthen those muscles, but in fact, they actually need to be shortened because that's the problem. They're overstretched, and continued stretching is just going to make it weaker and weaker.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that's good to know. Because, well, I mean, to be fair, when you have plantar fasciitis, you kind of want some sort of relief, and it's fair to think that maybe, massaging it will help. But yeah.
Kevin, did you develop any bone spurs in the area because of it?
Surprisingly not.
No.
I actually thought I did. I actually thought I broke my foot at one time, but after multiple x-rays, the doctor said there's no bones broken, no spurs or anything.
Wow. I
got lucky.
Well.
I mean, despite all the injuries, of course.
Yeah, so anybody wants to add any more questions, want to follow up on something? Feel free to put in the chat. By default, the chat goes to the panelists, but if you ask us. Okay. So do we want to wrap up then? Talk about what the resources that are available to everyone, or do we have anything?
Yeah, absolutely. So everything that we referenced today is available on the self-care series of our website. We also have a bunch of articles that we've written over the last 8 years in our resources section. So there's plenty of information there that you can refer to. Most recently, we've been working on a bunch of stuff behind the scenes. So we have a self-care video course, which you can follow online. It's basically muscle testing. You're testing for weakness or tightness. There are lots of strengthening and stretching activities there you can do to treat any problem areas that you have. We also have some workshops that you can download. and have on hand for self-care. We have foam rolling for lower body dominant activities. We have massage for the lower leg and foot, partner massage for the neck and shoulders. So there's a bunch of cool stuff on there. We are also doing virtual consultations. So it's a video chat with all of our therapists are offering them. You can just book them online. So they're available now while we remain closed, and we're actually going to continue with those as a new service once our offices reopen. Anything else I've forgotten?
No, that's great. And again, like, you can go to our website to check all this out.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, hopefully, like, we switch into yellow soon, and then soon to green, so we'll be able to see you in person.
Yes.
And get this advice more face to face, which I think we are all eager to get back to.
Absolutely.
So
yeah, so if there aren't any more questions, thank you all for joining us today. Yeah, and our next week we're going to be moving to the arms, because they've been neglected in these discussions. So we're gonna, our topic next week will be on the arms.
Awesome.
All right. Thank you so much for tuning in.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Mom.
Hey, Mom.
Hey, bye. Bye, Olivia.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Kevin, for speaking.
Oh, you're welcome.
All right.
All right.
Have a good
Bye.
evening.
You
Bye.
too.
Thanks, Kevin.
You're welcome.